What's up guys, I'm Justin Stenstrom from Elite Man Magazine, and in this video I'm going to share with you how to easily overcome any fear or phobia. So I want to begin today by first introducing you to a woman by the name of Mary Covert Jones, who you probably have never heard of unless you're a psych major or unless you studied psychology in some regard, because she is considered to be the mother of behavioral therapy, and she lived about 100 years ago, and this story in particular takes place in the year 1924. So in this particular year, Mary was presented with a boy who had a bad case of leporiphobic, which basically means the kid had a fear of bunnies, or in this case, rabbits. And before you say how pathetic that is and how ridiculous that may seem, the kid was 3 years old. So when you're that age, these types of things can manifest and actually become a real phobia. And the mother of this poor boy tried a number of techniques back then to try to help her son get over his fear, but unfortunately, no matter what she did, he just couldn't get over his fear of rabbits. So essentially what Mary Covert Jones did to help this boy get over his fears was exposure therapy. She slowly and gradually built him up to be able to withstand being around the bunnies in a controlled environment, a safe environment where he felt comfortable and he felt like he wasn't going to be harmed by those bunnies. Now, Mary didn't want to just take the boy and throw him straight into the fire, because at such a young age, this could totally backfire. He doesn't have control over his thoughts or his feelings or his emotions like, say, an adult would. And this approach was generally not recommended. So she took a more gradual approach and slowly, progressively built up the challenges of the boy getting closer and closer to the rabbit. And eventually, after a short period of time, he was able to actually pat the rabbit and be friendly with the rabbit and actually completely lose his fear of that rabbit. And again, this is essentially the groundwork for what later became exposure therapy. And exposure therapy is simply exposing yourself to a stimulus and gradually building up over time to the point where that stimulus or that fear or phobia has no effect on you. And they've been using exposure therapy for many years, because the thing is, it actually works. And there was a recent study done just a couple of years ago that I want to talk about in just a moment, where scientists for the first time ever have been able to identify in the brain the place where memories are actually formed, and how this directly relates to your fears, and how that fear is actually being formed in the brain, and also how you can change that fear and actually get over it. But first, let's just think about it for one moment. When you see things all day long, you're either getting a positive reaction, a negative reaction, or a neutral reaction. But let's just talk about for a moment that negative reaction. So there's all kinds of stimuli all day long giving you feedback and actually programming your brain to have a reaction, an emotional reaction, a chemical reaction, a physiological reaction, and that reaction is just based off your past. It's based off your memories of what reality really is. And in the brain, your mind forms this reaction. Again, it's a chemical physiological process here of what's actually supposed to happen inside from you when you have a stimuli. So you're running through the woods and all of a sudden you see a rustle in the bushes and this giant wolf pops out of nowhere and scares the absolute shit out of you, which, by the way, has actually happened to me in real life. Or you're walking down the street and you turn a corner and all of a sudden you bump into the most beautiful girl you've ever seen. Or lastly, you are sitting in a crowd full of hundreds of people and you are normally shy and reserved, but this presenter on stage randomly picks you to come up and help him with the demonstration. Now, your normal reaction in all of these situations is one of fear. Your mind has literally been programmed over the years so that when it sees a stimulus like one of these examples, the emotional reaction is just simply fear. But just like that fear response has been wired into your brain over the years, it has actually formed circuits in your brain so that you have a jolt of fear rushing through your body when one of those things pops up. You can also rewire your brain and retrain it so that when one of these things pops up, you can actually not have that fear response. You could have a different response entirely. You could actually accept and embrace these different things and actually come to enjoy them. And you can do this simply by using exposure therapy. For the presenter example, you could actually work your way up from doing smaller speeches to eventually being that guy who picked you out in the crowd, where you're the presenter now, you're the master speaker, and you're picking other people out in the crowd. For the woman example, you could actually get good with socializing, with talking to women, with actually going on dates, and actually get that girl that you bumped into to be your girlfriend. And for the wolf example, It's probably not the best example because having a fear of wolves is probably a good idea, but you could actually work in, say, a zoo and actually familiarize yourself with being around crazy animals like wolves. But I think you get the point. You can use this exposure therapy and work your way up no matter what that fear is, no matter what that phobia is, you can overcome it. And I did promise you that groundbreaking study where scientists have actually been able to identify how memories are formed. So there's this guy by the name of Dr. Johannes Graf and a bunch of his team. He's got a bunch of other people on his team. They studied mice recently and actually identified clusters of neurons in the brain, and they called these clusters engrams. Now, Graf and his team of scientists believe that these engrams are actually the physical representation of memories, and the more that they studied these mice remembering things and recollecting things, the more that they saw these engrams actually becoming stronger and more solidified. And during this process of reconsolidation, there actually exists a purgatory time of sorts where different changes can occur, and this is where it really gets interesting. So here's the best part of it all. Graf and his team actually studied these mice and studied their fear response to different stimuli, and they actually saw those engrams being created when they had an initial fear. But the cool thing is, by using exposure therapy, the scientists were actually able to also make a change in this purgatorial time and change that fear response into a favorable response so that the mice were able to get over their fears. So for the first time ever, they were able to both empirically see the mice getting over their fears, but more importantly, they were able to actually see those neurons forming in the brain, which proved that the mice got over their fears. And this was all done using exposure therapy. That's the power of exposure therapy. When you're able to expose yourself to your fears and actually face them, you will get over them. Now, you can actually go really slow with this. You can be like that 3-year-old boy when he got over his fears of the bunnies, or you can be a lot faster and just kind of dive right into it. It's really up to you, though. You can find a happy medium in between as well. That works good too. But in both situations, you're gonna find success. It's really just a matter of how much time you want to spend before you get to that success. But most of the time, I like just diving right in and facing my fears head on. And what I've always found is that the fear is actually way worse than the thing itself. So I personally like to dive right in and just go for the throat. I like to go for the kill, take it all in, embrace the fears fully, and what happens is the fear just goes away, it dissipates on its own. But some other people may need to work themselves up and use more of that exposure therapy and kind of build themselves up to that point. I get it. Either way works. Pick what you want to do. Well, that's it for today, guys. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like below and also share in the comments section what fear that you're going to overcome using exposure therapy or just diving right in and taking it right on. And as always, make sure you subscribe to our channel on YouTube, hit the notification bell, and follow me on Instagram at Justin Stenstrom.